今年接到一个很奇特的合作邀约，说是《致富心态》的作者 Morgan Housel 要专门为台湾学员开一个线上课程，邀请我跟他进行深度对谈，将台湾人最关心的理财议题当面请教他。我一开始的反应是：这诈骗吗？为什么这位当代最畅销的财经作家，两本书全球总共已经卖800万本的他，要专门为小小的台湾开一堂课？而且 Morgan Housel 讲的东西是放诸四海皆准的。已经财务自由的他为什么要做这件事情？查了一下邀课单位 MasterTalks， 也算是老牌的课程平台，但上面的课程比较偏向是给专业人士的。他们是怎么能够神通广大的请到 Morgan Housel 还有 The Four Pillars of Investing 的作者 William Bernstein 一起来开这堂给一般大众的理财课程呢？因为上半年实在太忙了，本来没有想要接这个案子，但他是 Morgan Housel 是那本彻底改变我投资策略书的作者，并且让我频道去年迎来另一次快速成长的 Morgan Housel 先不管报酬高不高能够有机会跟他直接对谈好像挺酷的。于是跟 MasterTalks 的伙伴先约了线上会议，先确认这件事情是真的。然后我在电子报上发了个问卷，收集了200多个回应，我浓缩统整出了10个问题之后，在某天早上7点钟是他西雅图的下午4点，跟 Morgan Housel 在线上畅聊了超过1个小时。我只能说，虽然我对他的投资哲学再熟悉不过了，但这次的对话还是让我收获满满。对，我还邀请他今年出第3本书的时候来台湾打书，我希望能够有机会跟他当面聊聊。除了会放在课程里面的理财问题以外，我还特别自肥请他分享了许多早期写文章跟出书的心路历程。他还讲了一个从来没有公开分享的故事让我听得如痴如醉他真超会讲故事的。如果你也有志成为一位创作者，今天这期节目绝对可以让你收获满满，一定要看到最后嘿，大家欢迎回到我的频道。如果你是新朋友，我叫秀秀，这个频道我会跟大家分享科学的方法与工具，来帮助大家工作更有效率，身心更健康。访谈的一开始我当然是化身成小粉丝跟他说我有多爱他的书，还有他的观点对我的影响有多大。尤其讲到波动度是你进入投资市场必须要付的入场费这件事情，这观点实在太令人耳目一新了。
I think the idea too of volatility is the price of admission. That's true for a lot of things in life. That's true for careers, relationships, countries.
Yes.
Everything is a constant chain of ups and downs. And there's no such thing as just like permanently enduring good for anything, for a career, for a relationship, for a country. Anything is always an up and down.
Yeah.
The ability to endure it, not avoid it, but the ability to just put up with it. Psychologically and financially is so incredibly important. There's a really good historian, I can't think of his name right now, I'll have to look this up, but he says one of the skills that you learn from history is the ability to put up with a country's bad moods. A lot of countries go through bad moods. It's happened in Europe, it's happening in the United States, maybe right now, where you kind of do some things where it's like, man, this is very different from what we were used to. And I think that is inevitable anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I love history, and it's fascinating for me to think about. Let's just look at Europe in the last 100 years, how Germany went from one of the most civilized countries in the entire world to the atrocities of World War II and the Holocaust to one of the most civilized countries in the entire world. It happened, and that happened within 20 years.
Yeah.
Like very quickly. I mean, that's like the most extreme example. But there's nothing that is just enduringly good. Putting up with changes in volatility is so important.
Morgan Housel 常常会从历史书中萃取许多人类社会持续重复发生的事情，很多他都分享在《一如既往》这本书里面了。这带给我们2个启示：第一，你可能以为现在情况真的很糟，但是往回看个20-30年，我们人类就是在这些高低起伏中成长的，所以要相信我们每个人的力量跟韧性。第二，我们也要随时把风险放在心上。民主自由的生活不是理所当然的，一不小心就会遭到破坏。所以我们一定要居安思危一有不对劲就要马上采取你可以做的行动。接下来进入正题了，我问了他许多有关创作的问题虽然我已经听了他超多访谈，对他的故事再熟悉不过了，但我还是想再听他讲一次，当初是怎么在没有任何写作背景跟训练的情况下进入 Motley Fool 成为专业的财经作者呢？他的创作过程是长什么样子？是 怎么能够写出这么多旁征博引而且深入浅出的文章？
It's all true. When I started as a professional writer, not as an amateur blogger, but just as a professional getting paid for it, I had never written anything. And I had no interest in writing whatsoever. And I was terrified and I was not any good at it to begin with, too. So I graduated college in 2008. And that was the beginning of the financial crisis, the 2008 banking crisis in 2008. And so it was a bad time to graduate college because nobody was hiring. No, I wanted to be an investment banker or a hedge fund manager, and nobody was hiring. And so I needed to do something. And I had a friend who I hadn't talked to in quite some time. And one day I was on Yahoo Finance doing some research. And I clicked on this company's ticker, and on the news feed was an article by the Motley Fool. And I clicked on it, and I said, "Oh, that's my friend Sham. I know this guy who wrote this article." And I reached out to him, and I said, "Hey, so amazing that you're writing for the Motley Fool. That's so great." And I said, "By the way, like I need a job. I'm looking for a job right now. Do you know anybody who's hiring?" And he said, "Yeah, the Motley Fool's hiring writers." And I was like, the idea that I would be a writer was it sounded so boring, so bad. I wanted to be a powerful hedge fund manager, and I had never done it before, but I needed a job. I just needed money to make my rent, you know? And so they hired me, which was a shock because I'd never written anything. And I thought, okay, I'll do this for 6 months until I find a job at a hedge fund. But I ended up loving it. It took probably a year. The first year was really hard, but after a while it was like, oh, it's really fun to study the world and then try to tell a story about what you think is happening. I think I was made for that. Like, it's never felt like work to me. It's always just felt like I'm just observing and reading and going for walks and then try to tell a story about it. And that's it. So it's been a fun last 20 years.
他讲的完全印证了《做自己的生命设计师》这本书说的，热情不是用找的，是要做过一段时间之后才会出现的。即便他一开始只是骑驴找马接下这份工作，也不认为自己有写作的天分，但他花了1年认真做这份工作，然后就做出兴趣来了。接下来他就跟 Naval Ravikant 说的，当别人在辛苦工作的时候，他只觉得一切都是在玩，于是他花了将近20年的时间，玩出了这个世界顶尖的 specific knowledge， 打磨出他独特的写作风格。但这个过程不可能一直都很顺利的。我问他，这将近20年的写作生涯中，有没有受到挫折或者批评，甚至想要放弃的时刻？他的回答让我超级惊讶。
Yeah, almost every day.
Really? What?
that feels like not that I would step back and quit. It's not that. This is pretty established that this is what I'm going to do. But writing is very difficult, even if you've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
I always think it's interesting when you're reading a book, you never know that some of those paragraphs or even some of the single sentences in a book may have taken that writer a week of tearing their hair out.
Exactly.
Just going,
Yeah.
You never know. In the book, you just read a paragraph and you move on to the next. You have no idea. But the actual process of doing it's very difficult. I'll give you another example. We've remodeled a couple houses, not ourselves, but we've hired people to remodel houses that we've had. And it's always so amazing to see how much labor goes into building a house. Unbelievable how much work it is. And then you see like the Manhattan skyline or, a skyline of 10,000 homes. And you realize every one of those houses is so much labor, so much work, so much frustration. And to me, it's the same when you go to a library and you see stacks of books. Like every one of those books was 2 years of torture for that author. Every one of them. And all those books behind you on your shelf that I'm looking at, every one of those was 2 years of torture for the author. And so, but back to your question, it can be very intimidating to do, even when you've been doing it for a long time. And then B, when enough people read your books, if you're going to sell several million books, even if 1% of people hate it, that's tens of thousands of people who hate your work and will go out of their way to tell you how much they hate you. And so that, if you don't have a thick skin, that can be tough too.
Yeah, and especially writing on the internet, you can get the feedback like instantly, and they will never hold back and being polite. They just tell you how they feel, and as a creator, always take those negative comments too seriously. So that's I'm also struggle for.
It took me a long time. The other thing the kind of philosophy that I've had for it is I don't want to read the bad reviews very often, and so therefore I can't take the positive reviews seriously. If I'm going to ignore the critics, I can't accept the praise. So I tend not to read any of them. I've gotten better at this over the years, but I don't read the reviews or the comments, positive or negative. I just feel like I'm going to do the best work I can. I hope some people like it. I know a lot of people won't, and that's okay.
Wow, maybe I should not read all the YouTube comments from now on. Maybe I'll try.
I do think early on in my career, it was helpful. I did read the comments, and it was actually really good feedback to where I would write a blog post and I could read the comments and be like, oh, this wasn't any good. I need to learn from that and try to figure out what I did wrong. Oh, people liked this one. What did I do right? I should try to do that again in the future. So early on, I think it was very helpful.
我完全了解 Morgan 说的。我在频道上分享的知识，即使可能短短的一小句话，那背后可能是好几天甚至好几个礼拜的资料搜集、研究、统整之后才写出来的。我分享的领域更是需要严谨的查证，因为这是关乎大家身心健康的。而他面对正反面批评的做法，我也觉得相当有参考价值。接下来就要进入重头戏，也是我最好奇的，他到底是怎么在出版社不看好的情况下出版《致富心态》The Psychology of Money 的？他到底为什么会觉得有人想看一本既没有数字跟图表，也没有实际操作跟理财策略，只讲故事的理财书呢？
You're being very generous when you said they were unsure about it, because the truth was every American publisher rejected it. Every single one. I think there were 30 publishers in America that we sent it to. Every single one, 30 out of 30, said no, we're not interested in it. And then so it's published by a wonderful publisher named Harriman House, which is based in the UK. Yeah. And they're wonderful, wonderful people. I'm so glad it ended up working out with them. But the truth was, they were the only ones in the entire world who would even take a look at the manuscript. And I actually don't blame the US publishers for that, because I think it's very hard with foresight to tell what's going to work. It's easy with hindsight, very difficult with foresight. Similar, I guess, maybe similar examples would be, there are so many stories about Uber and Amazon even. You know, Jeff Bezos tells a story that when he started Amazon, he was trying to raise $1 million, and he had to take like 300 calls with venture capitalists before anyone would invest. And for Amazon in general, like it never makes sense with foresight. It always makes sense with hindsight. And so I have no hard feeling against those publishers. But to your point, I think you hit the nail on the head. Because I went to the publishers and I was like, this is kind of a random collection of essays. There's not really one storyline. And they're very short. Each chapter is going to be like 3 pages, and one chapter is going to have no connection whatsoever to the next. And that's how I write. And like, that's what I'm doing. And so that's a crazy way to write a book. Yeah. But to me, it was 2 things. One is, that's the kind of book that I would want to read, because everybody knows for nonfiction business books, 99% of them could have just been articles. They could have been blog posts. But when a person's like, okay, but now I have 250 pages to fill, I'm just going to ramble. It's almost unavoidable. And to me, I was like, the only way I have a fighting chance against that is to have a bunch of short chapters that are independent. And so, A, it was a book that I wanted to read. And B, I actually think in today's world where people have very short attention spans, it's a more effective way to write nonfiction. Now, if you're writing like history, that doesn't work. Fiction, it doesn't work. But for a nonfiction business book, I think that's how it should be.
Morgan 的方法给我超大的启发。过去1-2年我跟几家出版社签了出版合约，但总是被自己的完美主义搞到瘫痪，总觉得自己一定要写出一本旷世巨作出来。但现在我改变想法了，我知道我也很会讲故事，我就写一本我自己会想要看的书就好。希望明年开始能够把我现在累积的东西一本一本的生出来。接下来就是整个出书过程最精彩的故事了。You apparently struggle like 9 months and only get 1.5 chapters out. Yeah, and then you finish like 80% in 1 month. So can you walk us through?
Accurate, yeah. I signed a contract to write Psychology of Money in June of 2018 is when I signed the contract with Harriman. I didn't get any money up front, but it was just like, hey, we're like, and the deal was I had to turn in the manuscript by December of 2019. Wow. Yes, December 2019. And now, so June of 2018, of course, if I signed the contract, what did I do immediately for the next 9 months? Nothing. I did nothing whatsoever. And then my wife was pregnant. Our daughter was born in June of 2019. And so June comes around, I haven't done anything. The book is due in 6 months. I've done nothing yet. And so June comes around, I'm like, oh, but when my daughter's born, I'm going to take a month off to spend some time with my newborn daughter. And then in July, I'm going to start writing. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. And so July 2019 rolls around, and I'm like, all right, I have to start writing. And it's like, Morgan, you've been a writer for 15 years. Just sit down and do it. Yeah. And I think I wrote 3 chapters. And one of them I sent to a good friend of mine named Brian Richards. He was my boss at the Motley Fool many years ago. And I trust his opinion so dearly. I trust him more than almost anyone. And I said, hey, I wrote my first book chapter. Can you give me some honest feedback? And I forget his exact wording, but it was something like, not bad, but you can do a lot better. You can do a lot. And the thing was, I knew it. I knew. I was like, I know. And then I wrote another chapter. And I sent it to another friend of mine, a friend named Jenna Abdu. And I sent it to her and I said, same thing. I said, hey, can you give me some feedback? And she was like, it just doesn't sound like you. It just doesn't. And it was the same thing. I was like, I know, you're totally right. And so now it's probably like September 2019. The book is due in 3 months and I have really nothing to show for it. And I was really panicking. It was bad. It was not, I remember, because it's not that long ago. I remember my mindset of just being like, God, I'm in trouble here. This is not looking good. And I almost wanted to email Harriman House and be like, I think I got to scrap it. It just isn't working. And then it was like, you know what? I put together a lot of content over the previous 15 years. I've written literally thousands of blog posts. I'm sure, can I come up with 20 concepts that I wrote about that I feel really good about, and then just tell a quick story about each one? Like, could we just do this really quickly? And it was really a Hail Mary attempt. And I wrote 80% of the book in December 2019. And here's another story. I don't know if I've told this before. I finished the manuscript. This is probably like December 20th, like the book's due in 10 days kind of thing. And I was like, okay, I'm done. But before I turn it in, I need to sit down and read the whole thing cover to cover. Okay. And so I carved out 2 or 3 days that week. And I sit down and I'm reading the manuscript. It was in Google Docs. And I sit down at 8 a.m. I got my coffee and I'm like, all right, I'm just going to review this book that I feel pretty good about. And I start reading it and I'm like, this is terrible. It's so bad. It was literally like every chapter that I wrote, I was like, there's so many logical flaws. There's so many contradictions. And that was another moment of just like, I don't know if any of this is going to work. And then so I spent 2 days just like frantically editing it. And then I turned it in on time, like the day it was due. And I think I just about a year ago, I went back and looked at the email when I turned it into Harriman House. And I said in the email, here's my transcript. I feel okay about it, but I know it's not that great. And it's going to need a lot of editing. And like, I'm sorry, basically. Like, here's my transcript. I'm so sorry. That was basically what it was. And then they started editing it probably January 2020. Like, we took a break off for Christmas. Well, actually, some of the feedback was pretty harsh on it. The editor at Harriman House, his name is Craig Pierce. He's a wonderful guy. And he's a good editor because when something doesn't make sense, he tells you in no uncertain terms, this paragraph makes no sense whatsoever. And so some of the feedback was harsh, and I had to change a couple things. But when he was done editing it, he sent me an email. He said, hey, I just want you to know this was absolutely outstanding. This book cover to cover is absolutely sensational. And I remember just being like, this book, are you serious? I remember just like, wow. But still you never know. You never know what people are going to like and what they're not going to like. And so the book came out in September of 2020, 9 months later. And Jason Zweig of the Wall Street Journal has been my hero forever. I think he's just the greatest, not only the greatest financial writer, he's just a wonderful human. He's great. And so I've known him for many years. So he emailed me that August and he said, Morgan, I'd like to review your book. We are friends and I'm not going to do you any favors. So if I don't like your book, I'm going to write that I don't like your book. But because we're friends, because we're friends, I'll give you the option. If you don't want me to review it, I won't. But if you want me to review it, I'm going to be honest. And I was like, okay, like, all right, let's do it. And I was so scared. I can't tell you how nervous I was. Some of the Wall Street Journal editors emailed me. They wanted like my biographical information for this review. And I remember just being so scared. So one of the most scared I've ever been in my career when I knew this review was going to come out. And it came out. And I remember the first paragraph, the first sentences, Psychology of Money is one of the best and most original finance books in years. And I remember I was sitting in this chair and I remember doing this.
Yeah.
I remember doing, I so remember it. And if I had to pick like the highest point of my career, it was that. was that moment.
不知道你们看的感觉怎样？虽然我已经看了这个片段好几次了，我还是清楚记得啊，当时第一次听他亲口说到的时候的激动啊。身为一个不断挣扎跟自我救赎的创作者，我实在太能感同身受了。这让我回想到我出版1082万次转动这本书的过程了。一开始纠结了半年，才鼓起勇气把提案寄给郝明义先生。签约之后也是各种挣扎，我跟我的编辑啊雅涵学妹也一度怀疑，这故事真的有趣吗？会有人想买来看吗？后来每次翻啊，还是觉得热血沸腾啊，真的觉得自己做了一件很屌的事情，也庆幸自己当时穿越了那些痛苦，把书写出来。接下来我问了他有关第3本书《The Art of Spending Money》这本书是有关于什么的。他说他不会给不认识的人理财建议，难道这本书要来教大家怎么花钱吗？
So first, all 3 of my books started as blog posts or podcasts. The Psychology of Money was a blog post that I wrote in 2018. And same as ever, I'd been writing similar ideas like that. And so The Art of Spending Money was also a blog post and a podcast that I put together. And to answer your question, I'm not going to teach you how to spend money because I don't know you. We're different people. We live in different cultures, different countries. So you can't just say, here's what to do. Everybody's different. So this book is about the psychology of spending. Rather than saying, here's how you should spend, it's a look at envy, jealousy, social aspirations, what happiness actually is, utility versus status, social status. It's a book that looks at that. And so similar for Psychology of Money, I'm like, I'm not telling you how to invest, but here's how people think when they do invest, and then you go figure it out for yourself. I hope to achieve the same with this book of like, here's what's going on inside of people's heads when they're spending money. And maybe you can use those ideas to go figure it out for yourself. I think that's probably that's the safest way to give financial advice is to not assume that what works for me is what you should do, because that might not be true, but to say, here's what tends to be universal of how people think. Now you should go do something with it.
这就是他第3本书想要讲的，不知道你是不是也超级期待？接下来问他有关这次课程的事情呢？我猜他应该拒绝了99%以上的邀约。我问他为什么你会答应 MasterTalks 开一堂专门为台湾人制作的线上课程？
I always love doing international events. They're the most enjoyable talks that I do. I do a lot of talks, but when I go international, it's always so fun for me because I think this is true for a lot of people, but maybe especially Americans, that we tend to be very, not naive, although that can be true, but we tend to be very blind to the rest of the world. And it's so interesting for me to go to Korea, South America, South Africa. I was in India a couple weeks ago, and to see the differences and the similarities. There are so many differences, but there's so many similarities as well. And when you find a similarity, you know that's just like an indelible part of being human. Like people are thinking about risk and greed and fear, not because of their culture, just because they're human. That's like all of us. And when you spot something like that, you know you found something very important. How people think about risk and greed and fear is the same in America as it is in Taiwan, as it is in South Africa, as the same as in Germany. Everywhere it's the same. And so that's always very interesting to me. So come from a cultural perspective, I like doing things with overseas groups. I do a lot with Americans, of course, too. But I always enjoy doing things with people from different cultures. Even this conversation right now is more enjoyable than I would be if you were from the United States.
Thank you for that. So what you just said really resonates with me because I spent 2 years cycling around the world. Across China, across Europe, across Africa, and the biggest takeaway for me is that I find people are so similar. The things that we need deep inside our hearts, they are all the same. We all need love. We all need a hug when we are sad.
No, you're absolutely right. That the core values of what makes people happy and what makes people scared and whatnot, those tend to be the same. Even if Americans might think about entrepreneurship different than Taiwanese do. And I don't even know if that's true, but there might be some cultural differences between business and investing in money. I think Americans tend to be don't have a concept of enough. The right amount of money is just more. And that's not just Americans, but I think we've like perfected the idea of however much money you have, double is the right amount. And I think a lot of what makes America great is also what makes it terrible at the same time. We've had this for 200 years, a culture of you have to get richer as fast as you can. And even if you're rich, you need more. You need 100 times more. You need 1,000,000 times more. that has made, I think, Americans, like, we don't relax and enjoy life as much as a lot of other cultures. A lot of like European cultures, we don't relax and enjoy. It also makes us superficial, materialistic in a way. This is not just Americans. I think there's other cultures that are like this, but I see it a lot with America. If you compare Americans to like the Swedish or Norwegian or the French or whatnot, the Americans, I think, are more eager to just go out and try to make as much money as they want. But the Norwegians and the Swedish are probably enjoying their family more. They probably sleep better. They're probably in better health. So it's always a balance. And I think this is true at the individual level as well. I am so glad that people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos exist, because I get to enjoy the products that they've built. Yeah. And at the same time, I would never want to live their lives. No. Never in a million years. Yeah. Because the reason they're successful is because they have spent 24 hours a day for decades and decades doing one thing, building their business. And I would never want that. I want to hang out with my kids and whatnot. So you can, I think it's true for countries and people that you can say, I'm glad you exist, but I would never want to do what you're doing.
于是接下来我把整理出来的10个问题一个一个请教他，包括台湾人最关心的买房问题，以及他对我们这种低薪高房价的国家在投资上面有什么特别的建议。当然我也提到了台湾在地缘政治上面临的风险，他都有相当精辟的见解。这些内容都会放在 MasterTalks 的课程中。而最后一题是我自己想要问他的，这个问题我没有在其他的访谈中听别人问过他哦。他常常提到在理财中最重要的几个技能，其中包括有耐心、不 FOMO， 达到财务的目标之后就不要再移动目标，少跟别人比较等等，这些都是说来容易，但是执行起来极为困难的心理技能。而我们面对金钱的信念，似乎在成长过程中被形塑出来之后，就相当难被改变了。我问他有没有一些能够实际练习的方法，来增强这些财务相关的心理技能。换句话说，有没有可以增强财商肌肉的训练？
I think it's important for a lot of people is to realize that there's two benchmarks in life, internal and external. The internal benchmark is, this makes me happy, this makes me comfortable, this makes me proud. And the external benchmark is, are other people looking at me? Are other people thinking of me and talking about me? That's the external benchmark. Now, nobody is 100% internal benchmark. Very few people, at least. And so I and everyone is going to have a little bit of like, oh, I would love it if people admired me and liked my clothes, my car, like a little bit. But you have to realize that the only thing that's actually going to make you happy is the internal benchmark. Are you proud of what you're doing? Are you proud of what you've accomplished? And look at the person who has $1,000 in savings and is really proud of how they've earned it, feels a lot better than the person who has $100,000 in savings and is just trying to get people's attention. And so much of our desire for a fast car, a big house, whatever it be, so much of that desire is just trying to get other people to pay attention to you. And I think there's a layer deeper here where the reason that you want strangers to pay attention to your car and your house is because you're not getting enough love and attention from the people who actually care about you. There's a great Warren Buffett quote where he says, success in life is when the people who you want to love you do love you. That's what success is. I've always thought that was just like a really lovely quote. And I think a lot about too, that like my desire to show off is the inverse of how loved I feel. I think that's generally true. Like the more that I'm like, man, I want people to look at my car, it's probably because I don't feel like I'm getting enough attention from my own career and whatnot. Like it's very rare that someone who wants to show off their car wakes up every morning feeling loved. That's a big statement. And it's probably not that black and white. I'm probably overstating it. And of course, there are people who have Ferraris and are very well loved. This is not like a black and white thing. But I think the desire to get attention from strangers is usually like the last resort, because you're not getting enough attention from those who you really, truly, deeply care about. For my own life, I deeply care about the love and attention from my wife, my children, my parents, and like 2 or 3 friends. And that's about it. I want them to be proud of me. I want them to love me. But after that, my willingness to show off my car to the people down the street is very, very low. Or I want it to be, let's say. And so I always think about it in those terms when I'm trying to think how to spend my own money. Am I trying to impress other people, or am I doing something that these core 7 people in my life, it's going to allow me to spend more quality time with them? That's a big part of it.
我超喜欢 Morgan 的回答，再帮他重复一次。我们想要炫耀的渴望是来自于我们得不到的爱。 如果我们能够获得最真实的亲友们的爱，加上我们在工作中也能感受到爱的话，那我们就比较不会想去买一些负担不起的东西，去跟网络那些我们根本不认识的人炫耀。把这些钱都存起来，当然也就更能够达到财富自由了，你说是不是？以上就是今天的内容，希望对你有帮助。如果你对这堂 Morgan Housel 的致富心态养成课从行为开始改变你的财务选择有兴趣，可以用叙述区的连结去购买。结账的时候使用我的折扣码 SHO， 除了可以得到300块的优惠，我也可以获得一些分润。跟 William Bernstein 的投资金律实践课教你打造长期获利的资产配置策略课程一起购买，同样也可以使用哦。最后我要跟你说，你很棒，放轻松，别太逼自己了，就跟我和Morgan Housel一起当一个为自己而写的 selfish writer 吧。只要持续写出让自己看了会很爽的文章，你迟早会聚集一群看得跟你一样爽的读者的。我们下期节目见，拜拜。